What could be more devastating than losing the love of your life? For Kwame Adeyemi, the answer came when the woman he trusted as a second mother for his children turned out to be their greatest nightmare. The shocking truth is this: sometimes the person who steps in when you're at your weakest is the one who can destroy your family the fastest. This story is inspired by real court cases in Africa, where one moment of misplaced trust nearly cost 2 children their future. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how a 6-year-old girl saved herself and her baby brother, how a grieving father transformed into the strongest protector, and the lesson every parent needs to hear. Amara's desperate drawings and Halima's secret photographs became the evidence that exposed Naomi's cruelty in open court. And here's the urgent warning: if you think this could never happen to you, think again, because one wrong choice of trust can shatter everything you hold dear. Stay with me, because this is a promise a father swore never to break again. The rain had already turned the cemetery earth into dark rivers of mud, swallowing the shine of shoes and the hem of black coats. A line of umbrellas sagged beneath the weight of water, trembling as wind pressed against them. In the center of it all stood Kwame Adeyemi, his face pale against the storm, a man of 35 in a suit that looked like armor but felt like ash. He cradled his newborn son against his chest, the baby's thin wail cutting through the low murmur of mourners. At his side clung Amara, only 6, her small fingers clawing at the fabric of her father's jacket as though if she held tightly enough, the ground might return what it had stolen. The grave was open, the coffin already lowered. The soil around it smelled heavy, raw, as if the earth itself was grieving. Raindrops drummed against its polished lid, sharp and relentless. The priest's voice was drowned by the storm, a broken cadence that barely reached the crowd, but Amara's whisper reached her father clear as day. Her lips trembled as she lifted her tear-glossed eyes to him. "Where did Mama go?" she asked, again and again, as though the repetition might force the world to answer. Each question fell heavier than the last clump of dirt, landing on the coffin. Kwame did not answer. He adjusted his grip on the baby, pressing Oba closer, trying to muffle the infant's cry in the folds of his suit. His jaw clenched hard enough that the muscles quivered. His silence seemed deliberate, like a dam holding back something ferocious. Around him, umbrellas shifted away. People left quickly, eager to escape the storm. In minutes, the graveyard thinned, leaving only the family, the rain, and the sound of children crying into a silence that was larger than words. Amara's shoes slipped in the mud. She nearly fell into the pit where her mother lay. Kwame yanked her back, his hand rougher than he intended. The girl's eyes widened, startled not by the rain or the grave, but by the sudden sharpness in her father's touch. He immediately loosened his hold, kneeling so his face was level with hers. Water streamed down his cheeks, some from rain, some not. He wiped her wet hair back with a hand that shook, but no explanation left his lips. Instead, he pressed her hand against the baby's tiny fingers. "Hold him," he whispered so low it was nearly drowned out. "Just hold him." It was all he could give her. The service ended. Men with shovels filled the grave with heavy, sodden clumps. The dull thuds reverberated like a drumbeat beneath the storm. Kwame stood rigid, watching every layer of soil cover the last glimmer of polished wood. With each strike, Amara's grip on his jacket tightened. She buried her face against him, sobbing until her body shook. And still, she asked, muffled in his chest, "When will she come back for me?" by the time the mourners dispersed and the black cars lined up to take them away, night had already begun to press its shadow over the sky. Kwame refused offers of company. He left alone, one arm securing the infant, the other dragging Amara gently by the wrist. The drive home was wordless. The windshield wipers struggled against sheets of rain, the glass blurring like unwept tears. Amara watched the lights streak past, each one a fleeting ghost. She held her breath whenever her father's hand tightened on the steering wheel. He looked straight ahead, eyes hollow, as if he were already somewhere else. At the Adeyemi estate, the storm followed them inside, clinging to their clothes, dripping from the edges of their grief. The house was large, modern, filled with glass and marble that felt colder than stone. Kwame handed Oba to the housekeeper, Halima, and strode into his study without removing his coat. He locked the door behind him. The children never saw him cry, but the echo of his pain seemed to seep through the walls. It was later that night, after the house grew quiet, when a lawyer arrived carrying a small folder, edges softened by use. He spoke in hushed tones at the door, the rain dripping off his coat as he handed the envelope to Kwame. It was Zuri's will, a simple, almost careless document, written in her familiar hand, amid instructions about her small savings and her wish for the children's schooling was a name, Naomi Achieng. The handwriting curved gently around it, as though her trust had flowed effortlessly onto the page. Naomi, her closest friend in university, the one she had laughed with, cried with, sworn loyalty to when life was still beginning. The will declared Naomi as the children's godmother, a guardian, if fate should turn unkind. Kwame stared at the name as though it were a verdict. His mind twisted, piecing together memories, Zuri's stories of Naomi's kindness, her laughter on the phone late at night, her loyalty that Zuri often praised. His grief blurred into relief that Zuri had thought ahead, had given them someone, a choice, relief that perhaps he did not have to do it all alone. The thought felt like a hand pulling him up from drowning. He closed the folder carefully, as though it contained fragile glass. Then with sudden resolve, he pressed it against his chest. If Zuri had chosen Naomi, then who was he to question it? Upstairs, Amara lay restless in her bed. The storm rattled the window, lightning sketching trembling branches on her walls. She pulled the blanket over her head, but the sound of Oba's crying seeped through the thin air between rooms. She thought of her mother's hands, the way they had always tucked her in, the way they smelled of lavender and soap. The absence pressed against her chest so tightly she could barely breathe. She sat up, grabbed a stub of pencil from the bedside table, and scrawled across a torn piece of paper, "Mama, come back for me." The words were crooked, smudged by the tears that fell onto them. She folded the paper once, twice, and slipped it beneath her pillow, as if it could carry her message across the distance between this world and the next. She whispered into the dark, voice barely a thread, "Come back, Mama, please." Then she lay down, pressing her face into the pillow, as if the words themselves might bring her comfort. But the storm answered instead, its growl shaking the window pane, its rain drumming like fingers on a coffin lid. She closed her eyes, but the fear did not let go. The paper beneath her pillow burned like a secret, her first cry for help that no one else would see. In his study, Kwame stared into the dim light, the folder still unopened on his desk. He told himself that work would save them, that long nights in the office and endless deals would buy the children a future worth surviving for. He convinced himself that keeping busy was the same as keeping strong. But outside his locked door, the note under Amara's pillow waited, silent and unseen, carrying the weight of a plea that would haunt the nights to come. The doorbell rang on a morning when the house still carried the weight of mourning. Sunlight cut sharp lines across the marble floor, illuminating the dust that swirled like restless spirits. Halima was the first to answer. She opened the door, and there stood a woman in a pale dress that seemed to glow against the shadowed entryway. Her arms were full of flowers, lilies and roses tied with white ribbon, petals damp as if they had drunk from the same storm that buried Zuri. She smiled, not wide, but with a softness rehearsed for grief. "Zuri always wanted me here for them," she said gently, stepping inside before the silence could reject her. Kwame rose from his seat in the living room, his shoulders sagging but his tie still perfectly knotted. The exhaustion in his eyes faltered when he saw her. Naomi Achieng. The name had lingered in his mind since the night he opened the will. Seeing her now felt almost like an answer whispered back from the grave. She moved with assurance, her gaze steady, her smile tender enough to cover the raw edges of their loss. She knelt before Amara, who sat stiffly clutching a doll, and placed the bouquet beside her as though offering peace. "Your mother trusted me to care for you," she murmured. Amara glanced at her father, searching his face for permission. Kwame exhaled long, as if releasing a burden. "Naomi, I'm grateful you came." His voice cracked slightly, but relief threaded through it. He did not see how Amara's grip on her doll tightened, how her small mouth pressed into a hard line. He saw only a solution, a hand reaching to catch what he feared to drop. Naomi rose gracefully, turning toward him. "Zuri and I promised each other if anything happened, we would not let the children feel alone. Let me help you." From that moment, she began to inhabit the house like it had always belonged to her. She moved through rooms with a familiarity that unsettled Halima, yet soothed Kwame. She adjusted curtains, arranged meals, directed the nanny with a tone both kind and commanding. She seemed to know Kwame's schedule before he mentioned it, reminding him of board meetings, whispering of calls waiting for him. He took comfort in the precision, mistaking it for care. He convinced himself Zuri had chosen wisely, but shadows slip in quietly. That afternoon, Amara lingered near the nursery door, peering through the crack. Oba's cry rose sharp and panicked. Naomi bent over the crib, her hands steady, but Amara saw the grip on her baby brother's tiny wrist, too firm, almost harsh. Oba squirmed and shrieked. Naomi's expression remained calm, her voice honeyed as she rocked him. When footsteps sounded in the hall, she loosened her hold at once, her smile returning as easily as if it had never vanished. Kwame entered, tired but grateful. He saw only a doting guardian, soothing his son with patience. Amara backed away silently, pressing herself against the wall. Her chest ached with fear she could not name. When Halima later found her crouched by the stairwell, eyes wide, the girl whispered in a voice that barely reached the air. "I'm scared of her." Halima felt the words lodge deep inside, heavy as stones. She studied Naomi more closely that evening. She noticed how Naomi's eyes followed Kwame with too much certainty, how her touch lingered on Oba's arm a second longer than necessary, how her smiles faltered only when she thought no one watched. There was something beneath the silk veneer. Halima had served the family for years. She had seen masks before. But for now, she held her tongue, uncertain if grief was clouding her judgment. At dinner, Naomi directed the children's seating with the ease of a mother. She ladled stew into bowls, insisting on feeding Oba herself. Kwame allowed it, his face weary with trust. Halima poured water silently, her eyes lowering to hide the doubt rising in them. Amara ate slowly, her gaze fixed on Naomi's every move, waiting for a crack to show. She whispered again later, when the lights dimmed and Halima tucked her in. "Please don't leave me alone with her." Halima stroked her hair, heart heavy. "I won't, child." Yet she knew her promise was thin against the authority Naomi now wielded. That night, Kwame stood on the balcony outside his study. The city lights flickered like embers beyond the garden. Naomi stepped beside him without a sound, her presence filling the air with lavender perfume. "You shouldn't carry this alone," she said softly. He closed his eyes, the word striking a wound too raw. She placed a hand lightly on his arm. He did not pull away. Instead, he let her words sink in, soothing the ache he had kept hidden from his children. But behind her gentleness, there lingered a precision too exact, a knowledge too deep. She knew when he rose, when he ate, even the hour he retreated to his study. She prepared his coffee the way he preferred without ever asking. He wondered if Zuri had told her, but the details unsettled him in quiet moments. Still, he pushed the unease aside. He told himself that Zuri had trusted Naomi with her last breath, and that trust was now his inheritance to uphold. In the nursery, Oba stirred in his crib, whimpering. Naomi leaned over him, her face hidden in shadow. Her hand stroked his cheek, lingering, pressing too firm. The baby squirmed, whimper sharpening to a cry. From the doorway, Amara stood frozen, the dim light casting her silhouette thin and trembling. Naomi glanced up, eyes catching hers in the dark. For a heartbeat, Amara thought she saw something hard, something sharp flash in them. Then Naomi's smile bloomed again, warm, radiant. She cooed softly, lifting Oba into her arms with exaggerated gentleness, just as Kwame entered the room. He smiled at the sight, unaware of the tremor in Amara's breath. Halima, watching from the hallway, felt her skin prickle. Something was wrong. She did not know what yet, but she sensed the storm had not ended with the rain. It had only moved inside, taking the shape of a woman who carried flowers through the door. That night, long after the house had gone quiet, Amara whispered again to Halima while clutching her doll tightly. "She smiles when you're here, but when you go..." Her words broke, swallowed by fear too heavy for a child's tongue. Halima held her close, the promise of vigilance forming like a vow in her heart. Yet in the silence of her own room, she admitted she had no proof, only a gnawing dread. Still, she resolved to watch, to wait, to be ready. Down the hall, Naomi lingered by the nursery door, humming a tune soft and low, almost like a lullaby. But the sound carried a note of dissonance, a thread of something unsettled. Amara lay awake, eyes wide in the dark, listening, clutching her doll tighter. Somewhere deep inside her, a fear grew roots, silent but unyielding, waiting for the moment it would no longer be ignored. Halima froze when the sleeve of Oba's tiny shirt lifted, and the mark stared back at her. A bruise, round and purple, spread across the baby's tender arm like ink on paper. She stood in the nursery, the late afternoon sun slanting through blinds, painting bars of shadow across the crib. The boy whimpered as if the light itself hurt him. Halima touched the bruise with the gentlest fingertip, her breath catching in her chest. "Children stumble," she told herself. "Children fall. But not babies this small, not in a room with no sharp corners, no steps, no edges to strike." The explanation did not hold. The sight rooted her to the floor, blood rushing in her ears. Behind her, Naomi's voice rose, steady, calm. He slipped when I tried to change him. She was leaning against the doorway, her face placid, her smile faint. Her tone was casual, almost bored. Children bruise easily. It's nothing to worry about. She came closer, too close, and her hand brushed the crib rail as if claiming the space. He's clumsy, that's all. Halima kept her eyes low, her mind racing. She did not answer. Instead, she slid the baby's shirt down, covering the bruise, shielding it from Naomi's gaze. Later, when Naomi left, she pulled an old phone from her apron pocket, its screen cracked, battery worn thin. She held the phone steady with trembling hands and captured the image, the bruise glowing violet against pale skin under the strip of late sun. She saved it, the photo grainy but real. That evening, as Kwame prepared to leave for the office again, Halima considered speaking. He was knotting his tie in the mirror, his reflection weary but determined. She opened her mouth, but a flicker of movement behind him stopped her. Naomi entered the room with a folder in her hand, her voice smooth as silk. "Don't forget the meeting with the investors at 9. She glanced at Halima, her eyes sharp, her smile polite. It was enough to silence her. Later that night, Halima tried again. She stood in the hallway as Kwame returned, his shoulders slumped, the smell of rain clinging to his suit. She whispered, "Sir, may I?" But the sound of footsteps made her turn. Naomi was there, her figure outlined against the dim light. She crossed the hall swiftly, leaned close, her lips nearly brushing Halima's ear. The words struck like cold steel. "If you interfere again, I will make sure you regret it." Halima's throat closed. Naomi stepped back, her smile reappearing as Kwame approached. "I was just reminding her to rest," Naomi said, her voice light. Kwame nodded, oblivious. He kissed Amara on the crown of her head and retreated upstairs, unaware of the tension clinging to the air. That night, the house lay in uneasy silence. Shadows stretched long down the corridors. In the children's room, Amara stirred. She sat up, heart pounding, when she heard Oba's cry break the night. She slid from bed, pressed her ear to his crib, and whispered, "Shh, don't cry." She pulled her doll close, rocking back and forth. The door creaked open. Naomi's silhouette filled the frame, tall, unyielding, her shadow spilling across the wall like spilled ink. The girl froze, clutching her brother tighter. Naomi stepped inside, her breath calm, her eyes glinting in the faint glow of the hall light. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by Oba's muffled whimper. Amara whispered into his tiny ear, desperate, trembling, don't cry, she's here." Her voice quavered, each word fragile as glass. The figure moved closer. Naomi's shadow stretched, distorting, reaching across the walls as though it sought to consume the children. Amara's heart beat so fast, she could hear it in her ears. Her arms tightened around Oba, her small body shielding his. She did not scream. She did not move. She held him and prayed the dark would pass. Outside, Halima lay awake in her small room. She thought of the bruise, of Naomi's threat, of the fear in Amara's eyes. She pressed her hand to her chest, whispering to herself in the dark, "I must protect them." But the words felt thin against the weight of what prowled their halls. The house held its breath. In that breath hung the truth of the bruise, the silence of a child's fear, and the shadow of a woman who smiled only when others watched. And in the stillness, a plea was born, not spoken, not written, but carried in the pounding of Amara's heart. The gate clicked shut behind him, and Kwame knew something was wrong before he even reached the steps. The air around the house was too sharp, too loud, every sound amplified. The slam of a door upstairs, the thin cry of a baby trembling through the walls. His shoes splashed through puddles in the driveway, his breath coming faster. It was only late afternoon, but the shadows in the windows looked like night. He pushed the door open, and the noise hit him all at once. Oba's scream, shrill and endless, and Amara's voice breaking, pleading for someone to stop. He dropped his briefcase, papers spilling across the floor. He didn't bother to pick them up. He ran. His footsteps echoed hard against the marble, pounding with the same rhythm as his heart. At the end of the hall, he froze. The sound was closer now, sharp as glass. He shoved the nursery door wide. What he saw split him in two. Naomi had Amara by the hair, forcing the child against the wall. The girl's dress was torn, her knees scraped from struggling. Oba's cries tore from the crib, tiny fists beating against the air. Naomi's face was twisted, no trace of the soft smile she had carried for weeks. Her teeth bared, her eyes wild, the mask stripped away. For a moment, no one moved. The air was a held breath. Then Kwame's voice erupted louder than he had ever heard it. Enough! Naomi dropped Amara as though burned. The girl stumbled, clutching her brother, pulling him into her arms even as tears streaked her dirty face. She hid her face against his small body, shaking. Naomi turned slowly, her chest heaving. In an instant, the mask returned. Her smile snapped back into place, her tone syrup-sweet. You misunderstand, she was disobedient. I only meant... Kwame's hand shot up, silencing her. His eyes blazed, his jaw set like iron. He looked at his daughter, at the ragged hem of her dress, the terror shining in her eyes. He saw the truth he had been refusing to see. Get out, he said, his voice low, shaking with fury. Out of this room, out of my sight. Naomi's smile faltered, then vanished. For a heartbeat, her face hardened again, sharp with threat. But Kwame did not flinch. He stepped forward, towering over her, his body trembling with rage. Naomi's breath hissed through her teeth, but she slipped past him without another word, her footsteps retreating down the hall. Kwame fell to his knees beside Amara. She clutched Oba so tightly he could hear the baby's tiny gasps. He reached out, his hands trembling, and pulled them both into his arms. His chest heaved, his face pressed against his daughter's tangled hair. For the first time since Zuri's death, tears streamed freely down his cheeks. I'm sorry, he whispered. I should have been here. I should have seen. Halima appeared in the doorway, her hand over her mouth, eyes wide. She moved quickly, helping Amara straighten her torn dress, lifting the baby gently from her arms to check him. She looked at Kwame, her gaze full of sorrow and fury, and nodded once. No more silence, no more waiting. Kwame rose, gathering his children into his arms. His voice was steady now, resolved. We're leaving, tonight. Halima grabbed what she could. Blankets, bottles, the folder with Zuri's will, the phone with the photographs. The house that had once been filled with laughter now echoed only with hurried footsteps and the thin cries of children. The air was thick, electric, as though the walls themselves knew something had shifted. In the driveway, Kwame strapped Oba into his seat with hands that shook. Amara sat beside him, her eyes swollen, her doll clutched to her chest. Halima slid into the back seat, glancing over her shoulder at the dark windows of the house. Naomi did not appear, but her absence was heavy, like a shadow watching from behind the curtains. As the car pulled away, rain began to fall again, thin at first, then harder, streaking the windshield like claws. Kwame gripped the wheel so tightly his knuckles whitened. His children were safe beside him, but the image of Naomi's face, twisted, violent, burned behind his eyes. He pressed his foot down harder, driving into the night. At the hospital, doctors examined the children with quiet efficiency. They noted the bruises, the scratches, the signs too many to dismiss. Papers were filled, photographs taken, reports written. The words evidence and case hung heavy in the sterile air. Kwame signed documents with hands that still trembled. He watched as Amara sat silently, her head bowed, holding Oba's tiny hand. She did not speak, but the fear in her eyes spoke for her. Later, in a small waiting room that smelled faintly of antiseptic and coffee, Kwame sat with Halima. His voice was low, breaking. How long? Halima hesitated, then told him of the bruises she had seen, the photo she had taken, the whispers Amara had shared with her in the dark. Each word was a dagger, but he did not turn away. He let the pain carve its mark. "She warned me," he whispered, his eyes filling. "My daughter warned me, and I didn't hear." Halima touched his arm gently. "You hear now. That is what matters." Kwame shook his head, staring at his hands. "It's too late for what she's already endured." The night wore on. Outside, the rain softened to mist, but inside, the weight of what had been unleashed pressed heavy on every breath. Amara dozed against her father's shoulder, her face still streaked with tears. Oba stirred, letting out a small sigh, his tiny hand curling against Kwame's chest. Kwame closed his eyes, holding them both close, his resolve hardening with each heartbeat. Naomi's shadow still clung to them, but he would not allow it to remain. Tomorrow, he would bring the evidence forward. Tomorrow, he would make certain she could never come near them again. For now, he sat in the dim light of the hospital waiting room, his children in his arms, his heart breaking and mending all at once. The storm outside had passed, but another storm, one made of memory, guilt, and justice, was only beginning to rise. And somewhere in the silent house they had left behind, Naomi stood alone in the dark, her smile gone, her eyes burning with something far more dangerous than sorrow. The drawer jammed at first, as if it too resisted giving up its secrets. Halima pressed harder, the metal scraping against wood, until it slid open with a groan. Inside, the evidence of weeks poured out, photographs she had hidden away, each one a fragment of truth too painful to look at yet impossible to ignore. Images of bruises in shades of blue and yellow, bowls of food left uneaten, a padlock clamped to the nursery door. She spread them on the table, her breath shallow, her hands trembling over the mosaic of cruelty no child should bear. The lamp above flickered, its glow slicing across the photographs, freezing every detail. Kwame entered the room, drawn by the sound. He stopped in the doorway, his face pale as the light hit the table. He stepped closer, each photograph catching his eye, each one pulling the air out of his lungs. His hand hovered over the images, but did not touch them, as if afraid his fingerprints might stain them further. "This. How long?" His voice was no louder than a whisper, but it carried the weight of a confession. Halima lowered her eyes. "Long enough." She opened a small box from the drawer and placed it beside the photographs. A set of keys clinked inside, cold and gleaming. She left these, A second set, for the children's room. Kwame stared at them, as though they might burn. The realization struck him with merciless force. The locked doors, the cries he had dismissed as nightmares, the silence Amara carried like a cloak, all of it converged in those metal teeth. He reached out, touched them, then snatched his hand back as if cut. Behind them, Amara shuffled into the room, her doll dangling by one arm. Her eyes were heavy, but when she saw the photographs, she froze. For a moment, she said nothing. Then, with a trembling hand, she pulled something from the pocket of her dress. A folded sheet of paper worn soft from being held too often. She held it out, her voice breaking. "Daddy, I made this for Mama." He unfolded it with care. A drawing filled the page, clumsy lines of a woman with kind eyes, standing in a garden of flowers. Beneath it, words crooked and uneven. "Save me from the dark." The air left Kwame's body. He sat down hard, the chair creaking beneath him. His hand shook so violently the paper rattled. He saw not just a child's drawing, but a plea written in shadows, a message that had waited in silence because he had not been listening. Tears blurred the words, and still they burned into him. He pressed the paper against his chest, as though it might beat in place of his broken heart. Amara climbed into his lap, curling into him, her small body trembling. "I tried to tell you," she whispered. "I tried." He held her tightly, burying his face in her hair, the scent of dust and fear mixing with the salt of his tears. His voice cracked against her ear. "I see it now. I see you. I will never ignore you again." Halima turned away, her own eyes wet. She gathered the photographs, the keys, the drawing, and slid them back into the box. The room was heavy with silence, but it was no longer the silence of denial. It was the silence of reckoning, of truths finally unearthed. Kwame rose, still holding Amara, and looked at Halima. His face was streaked with tears, but his eyes were steady now, lit with a fire that had been missing for too long. "We take this to the authorities. Tonight. No more waiting." Halima nodded, her hand tightening on the box. "It's enough, more than enough." Outside, the night pressed close to the windows, the wind whispering against the glass. Inside, the lamp cast its glow over the evidence, over the trembling child, over the man who had finally opened his eyes. Kwame stood in the center of it all, Amara's drawing still clutched to his chest. The crooked words pulsed in his mind. "Save me from the dark." He understood now that the darkness was not only Naomi, it was his blindness, his silence, his absence. He kissed the crown of his daughter's head, his tears dampening her tangled hair. "Never again," he vowed, his voice raw but certain. "Never again will you have to ask for light." The house seemed to listen, the walls holding the echo of his promise. Yet in the stillness a shadow lingered, the knowledge that Naomi was not gone, that she would not surrender easily. Kwame closed his eyes, the drawing pressed against his heart, and held his children as though they were the only truth left in the world. The gavel cracked against the wood, and the sound echoed like thunder in a storm. The courtroom was packed to the walls, bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, eyes fixed on the stage where two lives collided. The air smelled faintly of old paper, sweat, and polish, but beneath it lingered something sharper, the tension of truth, waiting to be unmasked. Kwame sat at one table, his children behind him, their presence small, yet immeasurable. Across from him, Naomi sat poised in her immaculate suit, her hands folded neatly, her eyes calm as still water. At her side, Selassie Aduro, the famed defense attorney, shuffled papers with the precision of a man sharpening blades. Selassie stood, his voice smooth, practiced. "My client," he began, gesturing to Naomi, "is a woman who stepped into chaos with only compassion as her guide. She did not ask for the burden of 2 motherless children, yet she carried it. And now she stands accused by a man too consumed by work to even notice the cries of his own family." The words struck the room like stones. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Kwame clenched his fists beneath the table, the knuckles whitening, but he did not rise. His lawyer, younger, less polished, leaned toward him. "Stay steady. Let the evidence speak." Naomi lowered her gaze modestly. Her lips curved in the faintest smile, the same mask she had worn since the day she entered his home. For a moment, Kwame felt the weight of the narrative turning against him, the truth shrinking under her carefully painted performance. But then the evidence was brought forward. The photographs Halima had taken flashed onto a large screen. Bruises blooming on small limbs, bowls of food hard and untouched, the locked nursery door. The room hushed. The sound of Oba's earlier cries seemed to echo in memory through those images. Selassie adjusted his tie, unfazed. "Children fall. Old servants exaggerate. Locks on doors are for safety. These are fragments of misunderstanding, not proof of cruelty." He paced slowly, his voice measured. "And let us not forget, the father here was absent. Absent when the bruises formed. Absent when the children starved for comfort. He hid behind work while my client fought to maintain a home." Gasps. Eyes turned toward Kwame, judgment weighing heavier with each glance. He felt the tide turning again, dragging him down. His chest tightened. He remembered every late night in his office, every time he told himself he was working for the future, while his daughter whispered into pillows she was never heard. The judge cleared her throat. "There is also testimony to be considered." The room stilled. The bailiff opened the side door, and Amara appeared. She looked smaller than ever beneath the cavernous ceiling, her dress neat, her doll clutched tight to her chest. She walked slowly, her shoes tapping softly on the wooden floor, each step a tremor through the silence. Kwame's breath caught. He half rose, then forced himself to sit, his heart pounding as he watched his daughter take the stand. She did not look at the crowd, nor at Naomi. Her eyes fixed on the doll in her arms. The judge leaned forward gently. "Do you understand why you're here?" Amara nodded, her voice barely more than a thread. "To tell the truth." Selassie smiled. "A wolf behind velvet." He approached, his tone soft. "Little one, sometimes children imagine things. Sometimes fear makes shadows look like monsters. Isn't it true that you may have been frightened? Simply because your mother is gone?" Amara tightened her hold on the doll. Her lips trembled, but she shook her head. "No, she hurt us." Selassie's smile widened, condescending. "She? Or do you mean she scolded you as any parent would? Sometimes a firm hand—" The girl's eyes lifted suddenly, catching the light, steady for the first time. "She locked us in the dark. She pulled my hair. She made my brother cry until he couldn't breathe." Her voice shook, but the words rang clear, each one cutting through the silence like glass. Naomi's mask cracked. She shifted in her chair, lips pressed thin. "Lies," she hissed, too loud, the sweetness gone. She surged to her feet, pointing at the child. "That girl is lying." The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs. The judge banged the gavel, demanding order. Naomi's voice echoed over it, harsh, raw, unmasked. "She's trying to ruin me. They all are." For the first time, the court saw her as Kwame and Halima had seen her. Not as the calm guardian draped in silk, but as the woman whose shadow haunted a child's dreams. Amara flinched, pressing her face into her doll, but she had already done what no photograph could. She had spoken the truth aloud, and the truth had stripped Naomi bare. Kwame bowed his head, his shoulders shaking. Shame cut deeper than relief. He remembered the nights he dismissed Amara's whispers, the days he let Naomi's smile soothe away his doubts. His daughter had been calling out for him, and he had not come. Halima touched his arm, grounding him. He looked at her, then at his children, then back to the judge. For the first time since Zuri's death, his voice rose with certainty. "You have heard it. You have seen it. I failed to protect them before. I will not fail again." The gavel struck again, calling for silence. The case was far from finished, but the tide had turned. Naomi sat rigid, her breathing sharp, the mask she had so carefully worn now shattered. The room no longer looked at her with sympathy. They looked at her as though they had finally seen the monster in the shadow. As the session adjourned, Kwame gathered Amara into his arms, feeling her small heartbeat against his chest. She whispered into his suit, so soft only he could hear. "You hear me now, Daddy?" His throat closed, tears threatening. He pressed his lips to her hair, his voice breaking. "Yes, always." But as he held her, he felt the weight of his own guilt pressing harder. The trial was not yet over, and Naomi's fury had only begun to surface. What came next would demand more strength than he had ever known. The lights dimmed in the courtroom as people filed out, their footsteps echoing against the high walls. Naomi sat alone at her table, her hands gripping the edge so tightly her knuckles blanched, her gaze fixed on the family she had nearly broken. The shadow of her rage stretched long across the polished floor, a promise that the battle was far from finished. The screen glowed in the dim courtroom, and the first image filled the silence. A child's arm, bruised purple. Another flick. An empty plate with rice hardened to stone. Another. An iron lock biting into the wood of a nursery door. Each picture appeared larger than life, projected for all to see, stripping away every shred of pretense. The crowd leaned forward, some covering their mouths, some shaking their heads. It was no longer just testimony. It was a gallery of suffering, undeniable and raw. Naomi's jaw clenched. She shifted in her seat, her fingers digging into the armrest. For weeks she had painted herself as savior, her mask polished to perfection. But as the photos cascaded one after another, her face faltered. The softness drained, the edges sharpened. She whispered under her breath, her teeth barely parted, "This is fabrication." Selassie Oduro rose at once, his voice cutting the air. "These are mere snapshots, moments without context. Anyone can capture an image and tell a story from it. The servant Halima had reason to resent my client. The father, absent. The children, confused by grief. None of this proves intent, but the room was no longer with him. A current had shifted, subtle yet irreversible. The images had pierced deeper than words could. People murmured, eyes darting toward Naomi, and in those eyes suspicion replaced sympathy. Kwame watched in silence, his hands gripping the edge of the table. He felt no triumph. Each photo was a blade turned inward, cutting deeper with the reminder of how long his daughter had tried to tell him without being heard. He forced himself not to look away, because she had not been able to. The judge signaled, and Amara was called once more. The child stepped into the witness stand, her doll in her arms. She did not tremble this time. She looked at the photograph still glowing behind her, then at the judge, and spoke in a steady voice. "That was our room. That was my brother's arm. That was the food she left when we cried too much." Selassie moved closer, smiling with false patience. "Little one, you know stories can grow in the telling. Isn't it possible that Halima planted these thoughts in you?" Amara shook her head slowly. "No, I drew it before. I drew Mama, and I wrote it down. I said, 'Save me from the dark.' I said it before anyone asked me." The courtroom hushed. The judge leaned forward. "Do you still have this drawing?" Kwame rose, his voice breaking as he held up the folded paper he had carried in his pocket since that night. He walked forward, each step unsteady, and placed it on the table for the court. The paper unfolded, childish lines, a woman, flowers, and the trembling words, "Save me from the dark." Selassie faltered. His argument, sharp as glass moments ago, dulled in the face of a child's handwriting. He tried to recover, raising his voice. "This is manipulation, an emotional trick. We cannot let sentiment cloud judgment." And then Naomi broke. Her chair screeched against the floor as she rose, her face flushed, her voice a shriek that pierced the air. "Enough of this charade. That girl is spoiled, ungrateful, a liar. She twisted everything." Her hand shook, her composure gone. "I tried to discipline them because he wouldn't. I did everything, and now you all spit on me like I am the monster." The mask was gone, and what remained was raw and raging. The gallery gasped. The judge's gavel pounded, but the image had already settled in the minds of all watching. Naomi, no longer angelic, but a predator revealed. Halima closed her eyes, tears slipping down her face, not of fear but of release. She had known. She had waited for the day others would see what she had seen in shadow. The judge's voice rang out, steady, final. "There will be no further outbursts. The evidence stands. The testimonies stand. The decision is clear." Her words struck the room like the toll of a bell. Kwame Adeyemi is awarded full custody of his children. Naomi Achieng will face investigation for child endangerment and abuse. A breath swept through the courtroom, a collective release. Some clapped softly, quickly silenced by the bailiff. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Kwame did not move. He sat with his hands folded, his eyes on the small piece of paper still open on the table. Amara climbed down from the stand and walked to him, placing her doll gently in his lap. He looked at her, his eyes heavy with tears. "You saved us," he whispered, the words breaking apart in his throat, but inside guilt gnawed deeper. He saw every missed sign, every whispered plea, every bruise he had explained away in his mind. The verdict was a victory, but his heart carried the weight of failure. He pulled his daughter into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared, and whispered a promise that was part vow, part prayer. Naomi was led away, her wrists in the firm grip of an officer. She did not look at the judge, nor at Selassie. Her eyes locked only on Amara, burning with a venom that lingered even as the door shut behind her. The courtroom emptied slowly, footsteps echoing against marble. Kwame lingered, his children close. The drawing remained on the table, fragile yet indestructible, the testimony of a child who had spoken truth when no one else would. He lifted it gently, folded it once more, and placed it back into his pocket close to his heart. He whispered, almost to himself, "I should have heard you sooner. The lights dimmed as the doors closed, leaving the room silent again. But the silence was no longer denial. It was reckoning. And beyond the walls, the shadow of Naomi's wrath had not yet vanished. The garden had grown wild in 5 years. Branches of bougainvillea clawed over the fence, their blossoms spilling crimson into the wind. The grass swayed high, seeds catching light as though the earth itself was exhaling. In the center, where the soil was softer, 2 children knelt. Their laughter was quiet, not loud and careless, but gentle, as though joy was something to be handled with reverence. Amara pressed her fingers into the earth, her hair tied back, her skirt damp with dew. At 11, she carried herself with a steadiness beyond her years, though her eyes still held the memory of nights she had once whispered into the dark. Beside her, Oba crouched, only 5, clumsy but eager, mimicking her every movement. He poured water from a small tin can, spilling half onto his shoes. The plants did not mind. The earth drank greedily. Kwame stood a few steps away, watching. His suit jacket hung loose over his shoulders, his tie absent. He did not interrupt. He let the sight settle deep in his chest. His daughter teaching his son to nurture life in the very place where grief had first broken them. The same patch of ground where Zuri had planted flowers long ago. The same garden Naomi had never dared to touch. Amara brushed dirt from her palms and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a folded scrap of paper, yellowed and fraying at the edges. For a moment she only looked at it, her thumb tracing the creases, her lips pressing tight. Then she dug a small hollow in the soil near the base of a rose bush and placed the paper inside a wooden box. She shut the lid softly, burying it as one would a fragile treasure. Oba tilted his head. "What is it?" His voice was curious, light, unaware of the weight it carried. Amara smiled faintly, her eyes glassy. "A memory," she said. "Something I don't want to forget, even if I don't want to see it every day." She patted the soil back into place, pressing it firm, her small hand leaving a print like a seal. Kwame stepped closer. He had seen the paper often enough to know the crooked lines, the shaky plea, "Save me from the dark." It had lived folded in his wallet, pressed against his heart, until Amara had asked for it back. Now she had returned it to the earth, not to erase it, but to mark it. A testament to the night her voice had finally broken through. The twist of the moment came quietly. Amara did not bury the note with despair, but with intention. She looked up at her father, her voice steady. "If one day Oba is scared and he thinks no one will listen, I'll show him where this is. So he'll know that even when it feels too dark, someone will hear him." Kwame's knees gave way. He sank into the dirt beside his children, unable to hold back the tears. The wind moved through the garden, lifting petals into the air like confetti at a wedding, soft and fleeting. He pulled Amara close, then Oba, his arms wrapping around both. The scent of soil and roses clung to them. "I swear," his voice cracked as he pressed his forehead to Amara's hair. "Never again will you have to bury words for me to hear them. Never again." Oba squirmed, confused by the gravity, but Amara held still. She leaned into him, her hand slipping into his, her fingers strong despite their smallness. She had been the one to whisper into pillows, to carry bruises on her heart as much as on her skin. And now she was the one teaching her father and brother how not to forget. Kwame closed his eyes. In the silence he felt Zuri's presence, not as a ghost, not as sorrow, but as breath in the flowers, warmth in the soil, laughter in the children. The garden had become what she had meant it to be, a place where love returned even after it had been torn apart. As dusk fell, light spilled golden across their faces. The box lay beneath the soil, unseen, but its presence radiated like a hidden root, nourishing the flowers above. Amara's print remained pressed into the earth, a mark of defiance, of remembrance, of survival. The night gathered, but the darkness no longer felt suffocating. For the first time in years, it was only night, nothing more, nothing less. And yet, deep in Kwame's heart, one thought echoed like the closing of a door not yet locked. Naomi was gone from their home, gone from the children's reach, but her shadow still lingered in memory. Shadows never vanished on their own. He held his children tighter, as though by sheer will he could build a wall between them and every darkness that had ever tried to claim them. His vow was spoken, not to the court, not to the world, but to the soil beneath their knees, to the spirit of the woman who had trusted him, and to the children who had saved him from himself. "I will not fail you again," he whispered. "Never," the wind answered, carrying the scent of roses through the night, as if sealing his words into the roots of the earth. In the end, what lingers are not the storms themselves, but the way light manages to return after them. Wounds remind us of pain, yet they also remind us that healing is possible, that something tender can grow even in places once scarred. Darkness is part of every journey, but it does not have the final word. What lasts are the choices to listen when silence could be easier, to stand when fear says sit, to protect when indifference whispers to turn away. In every life there are shadows, yet within each shadow is the chance to discover how fiercely the human heart can fight for love, for dignity, for truth. There is a lesson in the way resilience rises, not loud, not always triumphant, but steady and unyielding. It shows us that strength does not come only from victory, but from the refusal to forget, the courage to face what was once unbearable, and the grace to promise something better to the future. Forgiveness may come slowly, and justice may not erase what has been lost, but the act of choosing compassion over cruelty, light over darkness, always changes the world in ways that ripple beyond what we can see. Perhaps that is what it means to live fully, to carry memory without letting it consume us, to plant something living in the soil of grief, and to guard hope as carefully as we guard breath itself. For in the quiet work of mending, in the vow to never let silence smother the cries of the vulnerable, humanity is renewed. The world is never healed all at once, but it heals in small steps, in the listening ear, the open hand, the heart that refuses to look away. And so, as this story closes, its echo remains, a reminder that darkness is not the end, and that love, when chosen fiercely and faithfully, becomes both shield and seed. Thank you for staying with this journey, for letting these words into your heart. If the story moved you, I invite you to share your thoughts below. I would love to hear your reflections. And if you wish to walk alongside future stories that seek to illuminate the quiet courage of the human spirit, please remember to follow and subscribe. Your presence here means more than words can say.